April 24th, 1954. Midnight in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's a town we all associate with, a kind of poetic tranquility.
Shakespeare's home.
Exactly. But on this one night, the River Avon became the scene of a crime. A really dark deed that sparked a mystery that has, well, it's haunted law enforcement for over 70 years.
And at the center of it all that evening was Olive Bennett. She was a midwife, 45 years old, originally from Scotland.
And she was last seen where? Exactly.
On Bridge Street, right outside the Red Horse Hotel bar. Witnesses saw her there, sort of scanning the room, looking anxious.
Steadying her nerves was the phrase used, right?
That's the one. She was waiting for a date, a meeting she'd apparently rushed to get to after finishing her shift at the local maternity home. It was tragically the last shift of her life.
And while she's waiting, something else is happening just a short walk away. Something that, in hindsight, feels like a direct warning.
A chilling prelude. Two young women decide to take a shortcut home. They cut through the grounds of Holy Trinity Churchyard.
Which is, of course, the burial site of Shakespeare himself. And in this incredibly historic, sacred place, they run into two men.
The encounter starts off innocently enough, or so it seems. The men offer to walk them home, but the mood just turns on a dime.
It becomes sinister.
Instantly! One of the men starts talking, describing in really terrifying detail what he could do to them.
And it wasn't just some vague threat, was it? It was a blueprint. A specific, horrifying blueprint for a murder.
Precisely. He threatened to push them into the river. But it's the next part that freezes the blood. He told them they'd never be found because he would, and I'm quoting here, weigh you down with a tombstone so that they wouldn't resurface.
Unbelievable. The girls, they were completely shaken, but they managed to get away. They escaped unharmed.
But that threat, that very specific signature crime he described in advance, it didn't just vanish into the night air. It was executed hours later.
In the early morning of April 25th, Olive Bennett's body is found.
In the River Avon. She had been strangled with her own woolen scarf.
And the connection to that threat in the churchyard was, well, it was undeniable.
Absolutely unmistakable. Olive's body was tied to a 50-pound Victorian tombstone.
A massive weight.
Massive. And it had been ripped, physically torn from its foundation, in the very same Holy Trinity Churchyard where that threat was made. The killer used the exact method he had described just hours before.
This wasn't a random act of violence. This was calculated.
The sheer brutality and the deliberate nature of the disposal just overwhelmed the local Stratford police. This was way beyond a typical homicide.
So the case escalates.
Immediately, Scotland Yard was called in, and they deployed one of their best, Detective Chief Superintendent John Capstick, to lead the whole inquiry.
And they threw everything at it.
Immense resources. They took 600 witness statements trying to trace every single movement in that town that night.
But despite all that effort, despite the tombstone, despite the threat, the two men from the churchyard were never found.
Not initially. And that brings us to the core, the tragic flaw of this whole investigation.
The young women.
The young women who heard the killer spell out his entire plan, they waited 8 years.
8 years. It's almost impossible to comprehend. They waited until 1962 to finally tell the police what they had heard.
And by 1962, the trail was completely cold. Any chance of finding two men seen in a churchyard one night, 8 years prior, it was gone.
So that's the mystery that defines this case. Why did they stay silent for so long? What fear kept them from coming forward? And who were the men who verbalized this murder before the victim's body was even cold?
And why, 70 years later, has no one ever been arrested for the crime that became known as the Tombstone Murder?
Welcome to Whispers of Crime. We're investigating one of the UK's most haunting and, frankly, most frustrating unsolved cases.
Before we get into the details of Olive's life and the crime itself, a quick reminder to please follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms.
And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, also called Whispers of Crime, for daily updates on every case we cover.
To really understand the tragedy here, you have to understand who Olive May Bennett was and who she was becoming.
Right. She was Scottish, 45 years old in 1954.
Yeah.
And for most of her life, she was described in a very particular way.
She was a dedicated midwife working at a maternity home a couple of miles outside Stratford. And the people who knew her, her colleagues, her friends, they almost all used the same phrase.
An inoffensive little soul.
Exactly. It paints a picture of a very quiet, maybe solitary person, someone dedicated to her work, bringing new lives into the world, while her own social life was, let's say, on the back burner.
But that all changed.
It did, dramatically. In late 1953, so just a few months before her death, something shifted. Her friends and family saw this sudden, really uncharacteristic transformation in her personality.
She decided to step out of that quiet life.
It seems so. It wasn't a subtle change either. She started paying meticulous attention to her appearance, grooming herself carefully. And she embraced a much more social, some sources even called it a hedonistic lifestyle.
That's such a strong word. It
Right.
really suggests she was making a conscious break from her past, trying to, I don't know, seize life.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. A determination to find connection after years of quiet routine.
And this new lifestyle, it costs money.
It does. Police later found she was making large and, for her, very unusual cash withdrawals from her bank accounts. She was funding this new social life.
Dining out, going to pubs.
Then, most importantly for the investigation, she was actively seeking male companionship. She was dating.
And she was very organized about it. This is where the address book comes in, right?
Yes. This became a crucial piece of evidence. The police found Olive's personal address book, and it was filled with the names and contact details of men she had recently met. It was a logbook of her new social life.
And a primary focus for the police, I'd imagine. A list of potential suspects handed to them on a platter.
It was their first and most obvious line of inquiry.
It's this transformation that makes what happened so profoundly tragic. Here's a woman who, for whatever reason, spent years dedicated to her career, maybe putting her own happiness aside. And the very moment she decides to break free, to find joy, to connect with people, that's the exact moment her life is taken from her in the most brutal way.
It speaks to a particular kind of cruelty, whether it was just random, terrible fate, or if her newfound openness made her vulnerable to a predator.
We even have a little detail about her final hours at work.
We do. A commenter who claimed to have some insider knowledge of the case noted that Olive had just finished her shift. She had delivered a baby.
And she was in a rush.
Hurrying along was the phrase used. She was running late to meet someone.
The person she was waiting for at the Red Horse Hotel, the potential killer. It just confirms that her final moments were filled with anticipation for this new life she was building.
She was actively pursuing that connection right up to the end.
So let's establish the timeline. On the night of April 24th, 1954, it all starts at the Red Horse Hotel.
The Red Horse on Bridge Street? Yes. That's the last place she was seen alive and well.
Witnesses saw her inside, alone at the bar.
That's right. And their descriptions are very specific. She wasn't just having a quiet drink. She was observing the room, watching people, and as we said, she seemed to be steadying her nerves. She was waiting for someone.
Preparing for a big meeting, it sounds like.
It certainly does. Then, as the night wears on, we get to the last confirmed sighting. It's near midnight, and she's now outside the hotel.
And she's still waiting.
Still waiting. And this is a really vital detail because it gives us two possibilities. Either her date never showed up, he stood her up,
or she met the killer right after giving up her weight. Maybe she started walking home frustrated and ran into him.
Exactly. That period, right around midnight, is when Olive Bennett effectively disappears from the public record.
And the aftermath, the events that happened in the early hours of April 25th, they left this bizarre trail of evidence.
A trail of her personal belongings. This wasn't a clean abduction. It suggests a struggle that moved across public spaces.
The trail starts with her hat, right?
Yes. Her hat was found on a place known locally as Lover's Lane. It's a towpath, fringed with trees, near the Memorial Theater.
The name itself, Lover's Lane, suggests this could have been a planned romantic spot. It fits with her being on a date.
It does. It suggests the initial encounter, or maybe the beginning of the attack, happened in a place intended for privacy.
But the path of the struggle, or whatever it was, it didn't end there. It moved into the Holy Trinity Churchyard.
Direct. Which confirms the churchyard was central to the crime itself, not just where the threat was made earlier. And this is where the discovery of her items becomes deeply disturbing.
What did they find?
Investigators found 3 very personal items scattered among the graves. They found her spectacle case,
Okay.
one of her shoes,
A classic sign of a struggle, being dragged or running.
and most unsettling of all, her bottom set of dentures.
Or dentures. Just left on the ground in a churchyard.
Strewn across the grounds. These items weren't just accidentally dropped during a chase.
So let's analyze that. What does that scattering of items tell you as an investigator? What's the psychology there?
Well, there are two main interpretations. The first is that it points to an incredibly violent, close-quarters struggle. The loss of a shoe suggests she was being dragged or thrown with immense force.
And the dentures and glasses case?
A violent blow to the head or face would easily dislodge them, so it could simply be the debris from a frantic, brutal fight.
But there's another possibility, isn't there? A more deliberate one.
Yes. What if the scattering was a post-mortem act after she was dead?
A final act of what? Contempt.
Contempt. Dehumanization. Think about what those items are. Her spectacles, her dentures. They are fundamental to her identity, to how she sees the world and how she presents herself.
To scatter them is to scatter her identity.
Exactly. It could be a deliberate act of desecration by the killer, a way of showing utter disdain for his victim after the murder was complete, leaving these intimate, vulnerable pieces of her among the tombstones.
It almost makes the churchyard an accomplice in the crime. It provides the weapon and then becomes the stage for this final macabre act.
It absolutely transforms the location from a simple setting into an active, symbolic part of the murder itself. The discovery of Olive's body is what gave this case its unforgettable name, the Tombstone Murder.
She was found by Stratford detectives on April 25th, caught in some river debris.
And it's critical to note that her body only surfaced by accident. The river debris snagged her. The killer's plan was for her to never be found.
The cause of death was confirmed as strangulation.
Yes, carried out with her own woolen scarf.
That choice of weapon always strikes me. It's so personal, so opportunistic.
It is. It suggests the killer didn't arrive with a weapon prepared. They used what was available, what was right there on her person.
So it could point to a sudden explosion of rage.
It could. A rapid escalation where the nearest thing to hand is used to silence her. It's a very intimate, hands-on method of killing.
But any idea of pure opportunism just evaporates when you look at how her body was disposed of.
Completely. The disposal was the opposite of opportunistic. It was planned, it was laborious, and it was cold.
Her body was tied to a 50-pound Victorian tombstone.
A massive weight, forcibly uprooted from its place in Holy Trinity Churchyard. The killer would have needed significant strength and time to do this. You have to select the stone, rip it from the ground, transport it, and then securely lash the body to it.
The intent there is crystal clear.
Permanent concealment. He wanted Olive Bennett to sink to the bottom of the River Avon and stay there forever.
And that level of effort, that bizarre method, it immediately told the local police they were out of their depth.
Which is why Scotland Yard was on the scene almost immediately. They sent Detective Chief Superintendent John Capstick.
And he wasn't just any detective.
No, he was a legend in post-war British policing. Capstick was the man they called for the most baffling, high-profile homicides. His involvement from day one shows you how seriously the authorities took this crime.
So Capstick and his team arrive, and they're faced with this flood of information. You mentioned 600 witness statements. How do you even begin to process that in 1954?
It's a monumental task. You're relying entirely on saturation policing and human intelligence. You interview everyone who was anywhere near the crime scenes that night. Then you have teams of detectives manually cross-referencing everything.
Looking for what? A name that pops up too often? An alibi that doesn't quite fit?
Exactly. You're searching for inconsistencies for someone who suddenly left town after the murder, for descriptions that match. But it's all manual. It's slow, painstaking work.
And what about the forensic side? We have to talk about the pathologist, Dr. Derek Barrowcliff.
Dr. Barrowcliff's work on this case was foundational. His postmortem confirmed the strangulation, and it also found alcohol in Olive's system, which backed up the witness sightings at the Red Horse Hotel.
But his contribution was bigger than that, wasn't it? This case sort of made his career.
It really did. It launched him into becoming a legendary home office pathologist. His work was so meticulous. In that era, he would have focused on the precise mechanics of death, analyzing the scar fibers, documenting every bruise to reconstruct the struggle, pinpointing the time of death as closely as possible.
So his findings would have been crucial for any potential trial.
Absolutely. They confirmed the high level of professional skill being applied to the case right from the start.
Which makes it all the more frustrating. You have the best detective, a brilliant pathologist, a massive police effort, and they were completely stonewalled.
They were. The killer had planned the disposal so carefully. The police had the murder weapon, the tombstone, but no prints survived the river. They interviewed all the men in Olive's dress book, but none of them were viable suspects.
So the killer was either a complete stranger or someone so new to her life he hadn't made it into her book yet.
And either way, after the crime, he simply vanished.
So for 8 full years, The Tombstone Murder is this chilling, open wound in Stratford. The police have this incredibly unique MO, but no suspect to attach it to.
They must have been certain that someone, somewhere, knew something. The killer must have talked. You don't commit a crime like that and keep it perfectly to yourself.
But nothing came. Until 1962.
1962. The single most dramatic and, from an investigative standpoint, the most frustrating turn in the entire case.
The two young women from the churchyard finally come forward.
8 years after Olive Bennett's body was found, they walked into a police station and told their story.
And it was the confirmation investigators had been waiting for, but it came far too late.
It was a perfect tragic match. They described the two men, the offer to walk them home, and then the threats. The explicit threat of drowning a victim and using a tombstone to weigh them down.
The exact method, the exact location, the exact night.
It was the smoking gun. They even provided police with detailed descriptions of the two men. It should have cracked the case wide open.
But it did.
No. Despite having this incredible corroborated testimony, the police couldn't identify them. The trail was 8 years old. It was beyond cold. It was frozen solid.
Let's talk about those two men for a moment.
Yeah.
There's the one who made the threat, the clear aggressor, but what about the second man?
His role is one of the great mysteries here. Was he an active accomplice in the murder that followed? Or was he just a bystander, a friend who stood by while this horrifying threat was made?
And if he was just a bystander, his silence for 8 years is just as damning in its own way.
Absolutely. If he was an accomplice, police were looking for a pair. If he was just a witness, then he represents a separate failure, someone who could have solved the case but chose silence out of fear or some misguided loyalty.
Either way, both men were given an 8-year head start to change their lives, to move away, to build unshakable alibis.
Which brings us back to the most agonizing question in this whole affair.
Why did the women wait 8 years?
It's the roadblock that killed the investigation. We can only speculate, of course, but the most likely reason is fear.
They were terrified of the men.
Imagine it. You're a young woman in 1954. Two men make a threat this specific and violent. A few days later, a woman is found murdered in exactly that way. If you think those men are local, you might be too scared to say anything. You'd fear for your own life.
That's plausible. What are the other possibilities?
It's also possible they didn't immediately connect their encounter to Olive's murder. I mean, the details were so bizarre, maybe they just repressed it or didn't want to believe the men they met were capable of it.
So maybe it was only years later, perhaps seeing a newspaper article revisiting the case in 1962, that the penny finally dropped.
That's a strong possibility. A sudden realization that the story they'd been carrying all that time was the key to an infamous murder.
But whatever the reason, the damage was done.
Catastrophic damage. Think what Capstick could have done with those descriptions in 1954. He could have rounded up every known local troublemaker, checked military bases, circulated the descriptions immediately.
But in 1962...
In 1962, it's a hopeless task. There are no digital databases. A description of a man from 8 years ago is almost useless, especially if he's changed his appearance or moved halfway across the country.
The silence of those witnesses effectively gave the killer a free pass.
It's the cruelest irony of the case. The police were told exactly how and where the murder was planned on the very night it happened, but the message arrived 8 years too late. So, with the trail of the churchyard man going cold, investigators were left to explore other theories to try and make sense of this crime.
But theory one has to remain the churchyard man, right? It's just too compelling.
Oh, absolutely. It's the most plausible scenario by a wide margin. The method, the location, the timing, it all lines up perfectly.
The theory is that they threaten the girls, get worked up, and then shortly after they encounter Olive Bennett and act on the violent fantasy they just described.
Exactly. The failure here isn't in the logic, it's purely in the identification. Why didn't Capstick's team find them in that initial sweep of 600 statements? Were they transients just passing through Stratford? Or were they locals who were somehow protected by a community of silence?
It's so frustrating. If they had been identified back then, the case could have moved to forensics, trying to match their clothing fibers to the scarf or something.
But without a suspect, the forensics are meaningless. The evidence has no one to point to.
Okay, so what's theory two? This goes back to Olive's new life.
Theory 2 is the spurned lover. This theory focuses on her dating, her address book, her waiting at the Red Horse Hotel.
The idea being that this wasn't a random predator, but someone she knew, and the murder was a crime of passion.
Yes. Maybe the date she was waiting for did show up. An argument started, perhaps over jealousy or rejection, and it escalated into extreme violence.
But the police interviewed every man in her address book.
They did, exhaustively, and none of those interviews produced a viable suspect.
So what does that suggest?
It strongly suggests the killer was someone new, either the mystery date she was waiting for who wasn't in her book yet, or a chance encounter. The fact that none of her known associates were implicated points away from a long-simmering domestic dispute and more towards a recent or brand-new connection.
Okay, then we have theory 3, which is more speculative. The French soldier.
This is a persistent rumor that has surrounded the case for decades. It's unsubstantiated, but it's compelling because it neatly solves the problem of how the killer disappeared so completely.
The idea is he was a soldier on shore leave, killed Olive, and then just shipped out.
Precisely. He would have returned to his barracks, maybe in another part of the country or even back in France, just days after the murder. He would have been immediately outside the jurisdiction and reach of a local police investigation in 1954.
Is there any actual evidence for this? A witness reporting a French accent, anything like that?
No concrete evidence in the official files. It really is a historical rumor, probably born out of the sheer frustration of the killer's vanishing act. But as a hypothesis for how someone could commit such a high-profile crime and then just cease to exist in the area, it's very effective.
And finally, there's the darkest theory of all. Theory 4.
This serial killer precursor. This theory asks us to look past Olive and her life and focus entirely on the killer's actions.
The method itself.
Yes, the sheer calculation involved. The strangulation, which is a very personal and controlling way to kill. The selection and physical effort of moving a 50-pound tombstone. The plan for permanent concealment. This doesn't profile as a disorganized, one-time crime of passion.
You're saying this suggests a predatory mindset.
A highly organized, purposeful, and predatory mindset. The level of planning and control is chilling. It raises the awful possibility that this wasn't a one-off event.
That this could have been the first kill.
The first, or at least an early one. Perhaps the killer learned from this, changed his method, and went on to commit other crimes that were never connected back to the Tombstone murder. Its unsolved status leaves that terrifying possibility wide open.
Whatever the theory, the Tombstone murder has become this iconic case in British crime history. 70 years on, the name alone tells you everything you need to know about its unique brutality.
The lack of resolution was so profound that 2 decades later, in 1974, there was a massive effort to finally crack it. The News of the World newspaper put up a huge financial reward.
£100,000.
An incredible sum for 1974. It would be millions in today's money.
It shows how much this case still gripped the public imagination. The hope was that money could finally break the silence that had protected the killer for 20 years.
It was an attempt to appeal to someone's greed, since their conscience hadn't worked. But even that massive sum failed. It generated a lot of media attention, but no credible, actionable leads came from it. The wall of silence held.
And looking back from today, we have to acknowledge how much the investigation was hampered by the technology at the time.
Oh, absolutely. The forensic limitations of 1954 are a huge part of why this case is still cold.
No DNA, obviously.
Decades away. They were relying on fingerprinting, which was useless after the tombstone was in the river. They had blood typing and fiber analysis, but these were rudimentary compared to what we can do today.
So even if they still have the evidence, like the scarf, the chances of getting a usable profile are slim.
Very slim. The evidence has degraded over 70 years. It was a massive investigative gap that Capstick's team, for all their skills, simply couldn't overcome. They had the tools of their time, but those tools weren't enough.
And when a case remains unsolved for so long, with such a haunting story, it tends to cross over into folklore, doesn't it?
It really does. The lack of closure has meant Olive Bennett's story has become a local ghost story.
People claim to see her ghost.
Yes, near the part of the River Avon where her body was found, the legend says she is seen standing in the water.
That's incredibly sad.
It is, and the most poignant part of the folklore is that some onlookers apparently mistake the apparition for a real woman drowning and try to call for a rescue.
Wow. So even in death and legend, she's still seen as a victim in need of help. It shows the community has never found peace with what happened to her.
Precisely. The case simply refuses to rest. Today, it's officially listed as unsolved and cold. It's on international lists of historical cold cases. All of the original investigators, like Dr. Barrowcliff, have passed away. The witnesses are gone.
But the story lives on, I know modern true crime podcasts and writers have revisited it recently.
They have. There's an enduring fascination, a collective need to preserve the memory of the midwife whose new beginning was so cruelly cut short. So after all this time, after Scotland Yard's best efforts, a massive reward, decades of speculation, the Tombstone Murder is defined by what we still don't know.
We're left with these huge, unbridgeable gaps in the story.
4 critical ones, really. The ones that have allowed the killer to remain a ghost.
First, and most importantly, the identity of the 2 men in the churchyard. Their threat is the most direct piece of evidence in the whole case, and it led nowhere.
Second, the identity of Olive's mystery date. Was he the killer? Was he an innocent man who got scared and never came forward? We'll likely never know.
Third, the real reason for that 8-year silence from the witnesses. Fear is the most likely answer, but that delay was the fatal blow to the investigation.
And finally, the forensic gap. The lack of modern DNA analysis on any evidence that might still exist. Without a scientific breakthrough, we're left trying to solve a 70-year-old mystery with 70-year-old information.
Olive Bennett's story is just so tragic. That last-minute embrace of life, of joy, cut short so violently. Her murder really is a testament to how time erodes everything. Evidence, memory, the chances for justice. 7 years on, the truth is still weighted down, somewhere at the bottom of the River Avon.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime.
Please like and share this episode, and if you have any thoughts, leave a comment below. Your ratings and reviews really help us. And remember to check out our other UK historical cold cases.
You know, there's a final thought that has always stuck with me about this case. The killer went to extraordinary lengths to hide the body forever.
The 50-pound tombstone, a symbol of permanence.
Exactly. He chose a monument to the dead to ensure she would never be seen again. His plan was for perfect concealment, but the plan failed.
The river debris.
The river debris. A random accident of nature defeated his meticulous plan. Her body surfaced, the crime refused to stay hidden, and even though justice was never served, the case has never been forgotten. It's a haunting echo in Stratford, a story that, like Olive's body, refused to be perfectly concealed. It's still waiting for an answer.